Heard quite a lot about the dangers of demonizing and scapegoating entire groups of people. We've heard condemnations of hate and of hateful language. We've heard that there's a rising tide of hate and prejudice and that it's getting worse by the day, especially now that Elon Musk has taken over Twitter. Allegedly, that's made it all worse. And it's true, of course, that we shouldn't demonize groups. That part is true. I agree with the people who warn against such bigotries. The problem is that many of those people do not agree with themselves. And if they are wondering why their anti-hate sermons, their homilies of love and togetherness, tend to fall on deaf ears as the alleged hate tide continues to rise despite their protests, they may want to take a long look in the mirror. The fact is that the very system now thrown into hysteria about the dangers of fanatical racism has itself fanatically promoted racism for many years and continues to do so today. Now, you can call this whataboutism. I don't really care. I am unapologetically saying what about. What about is a perfectly valid argument that needs to be brought up very often. So what about the openly genocidal racism that the corporate media, Hollywood, academia, the left generally pushes without apology and without shame every single day? What about it? Are we ever going to talk about it? Are any of the eager denouncers ever going to get around to denouncing that? Well, I know the answer, but I asked the question anyway, rhetorically. Last night, thanks to a repost from Chris Rufo, a video went viral of a Rutgers professor named Brittany Cooper speaking at an online conference hosted by a popular website called The Root. Now, this video is actually from a year ago, went viral back then, and I may have even mentioned it on the show back then, but the ensuing outrage, almost entirely coming from conservatives on social media, amounted to absolutely nothing. Cooper was not fired, was not suspended, was not denounced or even lightly reprimanded. Nothing. She's still teaching college students today. This in spite of the fact that she was on camera preaching the most virulent form of anti-white racism imaginable. Just watch.
I think that white people are committed to being villains in the aggregate. The real sort of issue here, and I've heard people sort of say it, is one, I think that white people viscerally fear. It's not that white people don't know, right, what they have done. They know. They fear that there is no other way to be human but the way in which they are human, which is to, so, like you talk to white people and whenever you really want to have a reckoning about it, they say stuff like, it's just human nature. If y'all had all of this power, you would have done the same thing, right? And it's like, no, that's what white humans did. White human beings thought there's a world here and we own it. Prior to them, Black and brown people have been sailing across oceans, interacting with each other for centuries without total subjugation, domination, and colonialism. Right? We have seen what a show this iteration of treatment of other human beings means, and that my hope is that we would do it differently, in the moments when we have some power.
White people are committed to being villains, she says. Now, put any other group in that sentence, and she loses her job. Black people are committed to being villains. Asian people are committed to being villains. Gay people are committed to being villains. Jews are committed to being villains. Literally any other group at all in that sentence, and it becomes the sort of statement that her career cannot survive. And we haven't even heard the worst of it yet, not even close. Perhaps more troubling, given her profession, is the hallucinatory version of world history that Brittany Cooper, who refers to herself, by the way, as Professor Crunk, offers up. And we haven't heard the worst of that yet either. She says that Black and brown people were sailing around the world and interacting with each other without wars of conquest, without subjugation, without colonization. There's nothing to say about that claim except that it is totally, absurdly, ridiculously false. There is not a shred of truth to it. Whichever groups qualify as Black or brown, especially those groups that lived in North America or Africa, what we know for certain is that they were slaughtering and enslaving each other without mercy since time immemorial. European empires did not invent the idea of subjugating a foreign land and turning it into a vassal state. And they didn't even practice the most brutal form of the practice. This was utterly commonplace across the entire globe for millennia. So Professor Crunk is either so dumb as to qualify as medically brain damaged, or she's a hateful, lying propagandist, or perhaps some combination of both. And that's what I suspect. She continues by offering her solution to the white problem, her final solution, we might say. Listen.
That's the thing that white people don't trust us to do because they are so corrupt. You know, their thinking is so morally and spiritually bankrupt about power that they can't they fear viscerally, existentially letting go of power because they cannot imagine that there's another way to be. It is either that you dominate or you are dominated. And isn't it sad that is spiritually who they are and that they can't imagine a sort of more expansive notion of the world? The thing I want to say to you is we got to take these out. But we can't say that, right? We can't say, I don't believe in a project of violence. I truly don't. Because I think in the end that our souls suffer from that. The world didn't start when white people arrived in America and tried to tell all the rest of us how things were going to go. There were people out here making worlds, Africans and indigenous people being brilliant, and, libraries and inventions and, vibrant notions of humanity and cross-cultural exchange long before white people showed up being raggedy and violent and terrible and trying to take everything from everybody.
So we hear again her Fantasyland alternate retelling of world history, adding in the detail that Africans somehow made it to North America before Europeans. She then imagines that indigenous people had libraries, which would be difficult considering that most of the tribes didn't even have a written language, much less did they have books. And she says that they lived peacefully until raggedy white people introduced violence to the Western Hemisphere. And she's right. North America was entirely free of violence before first contact with Europeans. Free of violence if you don't count scalping, cannibalism, human sacrifice, rape, pillage, murder, war, slavery, conquest, etc. Other than all of that, it was quite peaceful, really. Not that Professor Crunk is an advocate of peace. She says herself that she really wants to take these mother effers out, that they're corrupt, and she wants to take these mother effers out. Again, just imagine, black people are so corrupt. We need to take these mother effers out. Gay people are so corrupt. We need to take these mother effers out. Jews are so corrupt. We need to take these mother effers out. Any of those statements, and you are done forever. You're never getting another job. You're getting deplatformed from everything. You're losing your bank accounts. You are losing everything. Unless you put white people in there. The only reason she stopped short of fully promoting such a strategy is that she can't say that, she says. And besides, she's worried that exterminating white people might be injurious to the souls of their exterminators. And she's right about that second part, but not the first. In fact, she can say that she wants to murder all white people. She did say it. And she suffered no consequence whatever for doing so. Later in the video, she speaks wistfully and hopefully about the coming end of whiteness and assures herself and the audience that, eventually white people will be extinct and non-white people can get back to living in peace without the, quote, inconvenience of their presence. It is, again, in summary, a genocidally hateful and racist diatribe. She is calling for, or at the very least, fantasizing openly about the extermination of an entire race of people. And she presented this to a media publication on video and suffered no consequence for it. You can, in fact, in this country, openly call for the extermination of white people without the slightest worry that any legal, professional, or reputational damage will result. Just ask Nick Cannon. He is currently, as he has been for several years, the host of The Masked Singer on Fox. He's had high-paying, high-profile jobs on national TV for the better part of this century. And yet, infamously, he has openly called white people savages and postulated that their lack of, quote, melanin makes them subhuman. Let's just take a trip down memory lane and watch this again. It's from a couple of years ago, and here's what Nick Cannon said.
Melanin comes with compassion. Melanin comes with soul that we call it. We call it soul. We soul brothers and sisters. That's the melanin that connects us. Right. So the people that don't have it are a little, and I'm gonna say this carefully, are a little less. And where the term actually comes from, because I'm bringing it all the way back around to Minister Farrakhan, to where they may not have the compassion or the when they were sent to the mountains of Caucasus when they didn't have the power of the sun, that the sun then started to deteriorate them. So then they're acting out of fear. They're acting out of low self-esteem. They're acting out of a deficiency. So therefore, the only way that they can act is evil. The only way they have to rob, steal, rape, kill, and
fight or flight,
in order to survive.
Exactly.
So then these people who didn't have what we had, and when I say we, I speak of the melanated people.
Right.
They had to be savages. They had to be barbaric. Because they're in these Nordic mountains. They're in these rough, torrential environments. So they're acting as animals.
Right.
So they're the ones that are actually closer to animals. They're the ones that are actually the true savages.
Acting as animals, says the guy that has like 10 kids with 6 different women or something. After that podcast interview, Nick Cannon did, for a short period, lose his job, which he quickly regained and has gotten back to his TV career without any issue. But the momentary slap on the wrist only came because during the same podcast, he said that black people are, quote, the true Hebrews, which is an incoherent talking point we've also heard from Kanye West. Also, not nearly as vicious or hateful as what he said about white people generally. So Cannon was chastised for the true Hebrews comment. He even briefly lost his job for it. But there was never any chastisement, never any denouncement from any notable person or organization for literally calling all white people subhuman, animalistic savages. Because that's the kind of thing you're allowed to say. Not just allowed to say, but rewarded for saying. Anti-white bigotry is not simply tolerated, it is celebrated. Professor Crunk and Nick Cannon aren't living in a vacuum. These viciously anti-white sentiments can be heard from celebrities, from college professors, from government officials, and many others. The sentiments are expressed out loud, enacted into law. They are set as policy, embedded into the system. The Biden administration gave out COVID relief according to a racial hierarchy with whites at the bottom, where I suppose these savage, animalistic villains belong. As far as interracial violence goes, all the hate leading to violence, well, okay, let's talk about that. Twice as many white people fall victim to interracial homicide as commit it, and that's just homicides. We haven't even, we've seen many videos of groups of people in one race stomping the hell out of an individual of another race, but the victim in those videos is almost always white. We have rarely, if ever, seen it go the other way. Certainly not recently. What this tells us is that anti-white racism is permissible in our culture. It is the only totally permissible bigotry that remains. And because it is permissible, it is also dangerous. It is the most dangerous. There are other kinds of bigotry that exist. But if society generally condemns a form of bigotry, then the danger that bigotry can pose is very much mitigated because it is condemned by almost everyone and certainly by almost all the most powerful people. It's not how it goes with anti-white racism. And nobody who speaks out against racism or bigotry and yet neglects to specifically denounce anti-white racism should be taken seriously. That's what this comes down to. If you're wondering why nobody can take you seriously, it's because you see what we just played there, and you either don't care or you applaud. And that's why.